Sus libros y artículos se centran en la representación urbana, en las pinturas de biombos de Kioto y el desarrollo de la pintura de género en Japón moderno temprano. Es profesor de Historia del Arte japonés en la Universidad de Columbia y director del Mary Griggs Burke Center for Japanese Art de la misma universidad. En el año 2017 fue galardonado con el premio Lenfest a la excelencia docente. Muchos de ustedes pues ya lo conocen, estuvimos una sesión hace un momento con él de intercambio para los estudiantes de la maestría actualmente, pero le doy entonces la palabra al profesor McKelway y otra vez, thank you very much for being here in Mexico and in Colmex in particular.
Muchas gracias a todos. I would just like to begin by thanking my friend and colleague, Dr. Amaury Garcia Rodriguez, for inviting me here to your beautiful city and your beautiful campus, your wonderful university this week. As I've told everyone I've met in Mexico City so far, I think I came here about 40 years too late, but it's a really incredible place to be in, and I have to say very deeply moving for me to encounter students and program that you are making the program so passionately about Japanese studies here at the Colegio de México. So thank you, first of all, and I hope this will be the first of many exchanges, not only between us two, but with all of us here. I've spoken to a few of you already at lunch about my talk today. I have a text which I'm going to read. I probably am more easily understood if I'm reading than speaking extemporaneously, so I'll go ahead and begin. But I'll begin by saying that there were moments back in the days when I was really obsessed about these panoramic folding screens of Kyoto, which were the topic of my doctoral dissertation and of my first book, maybe my only book really, when after spending the better part of an hour doing a lecture, trying to argue that the dizzying details of buildings and everyday life, urban life depicted in them, that they somehow added up to a grand, yet to be discovered political interpretation. Someone would inevitably ask, what about the clouds? And as dutifully as I might try to hit all the bullet points about the clouds, from their straightforward function of dividing up the pictorial space and covering up potentially awkward spatial transitions, to the less easily defined metaphorical connections to notions of a Pure Land paradise, jodo, here on Earth, the question about clouds always slightly annoyed me. As in, weren't you just listening to my complicated excursus on political intention, informed by deep dives into documents and diaries and meticulous readings of motifs? So why are you asking me about the clouds again? Or, I'm going out on a limb to try to crack a code here in this painting that's going to make these confounding images mean something, and all you can ask about is the part that's not even painted? So perhaps you get the picture. Or was I just not seeing the city for the clouds? Probably anyone who looks at Japanese painting at some point, I suspect, early on before they know better, wonders about the clouds. And with good reason, because clouds are a pervasive element across vast and diverse pictorial fields on each of the many formats on which Japanese paintings are mounted and presented across many centuries. Their impact, of course, wasn't limited to Japan, as most here today know much better than I do, as they evidently managed to drift across the ocean, finding their way into the visual consciousness of painters here in the New World, as these examples created in Mexico attest. Well, made in Mexico, now in Madrid. And I don't know where the Colección Rivero Lake is. Okay, so here's one still in Mexico. So why do the usual questions about clouds elicit the slight irritation or evasion that I once felt? And why don't we talk about them more than we do? There are more answers to this question than would productively fill the time I have today, which I hope is something like an hour. But I'll venture that much of my own desire as a painting person to talk or write about everything besides the clouds might owe to the historiographical moment in which I landed in the field of art history around 1990, when everyone was reading, at least in English, were reading Baxendale, Michael Baxendale, T.J. Clark, and Svetlana Alpers, and others in Western art history know Western painting history, who explained how pictures didn't really mean what we thought they did, and that we needed to situate ourselves in the period eye and so forth to discover some truth that was waiting for us in their lines and dabs of paint. In other words, that a picture was all about what was applied with the brush or other medium, which seems reasonable enough. Without laying the blame for my own ignorance completely on the contributions of such lofty scholars at the University of California at Berkeley, maybe it's best to admit that what was painted and even how it was painted, and thus by whom, mattered more than the format, the material, or other parts of a work that bore no markings, such as clouds. So, enough throat clearing. Clouds and their ancestor, mist, are such a constant motif that you could say that the forecast for Japanese painting is almost always overcast. We see them from the very beginnings of Yamato-e, the kind of Japanese painting that is concerned with Japanese subjects, such as native poetry, stories, and landscapes, on down to the best-known masterpieces of the woodblock print. This is another image. Woodblock print. The silvery haze, applied literally with silver and mica in a scene from the Tale of Genji scrolls at left, sits as comfortably or naturally on the paper support as the fish-patterned scales, the fish-patterned urokogumo scale clouds that striate the sky above Hokusai's red Fuji, each telling us how to feel about the season, the time of day, and to an extent, the emotional mood of the scene. There are plenty of Japanese pictures that don't have clouds, but they are so omnipresent that it's easy to forget they're there and how powerfully they modulate action and space. In medieval Buddhist paintings, they can announce the apparition of the divine presence in a Wizard of Oz poof and serve as a rapid delivery vehicle to bring the Buddha Amida and his retinue to welcome the blessed into his paradise, in the images on left and in the center. In a landscape mandala of Kasuga Shrine at right, bands of graded mist reveal and conceal, just as actual mist really does, the path to the god's temporary abode. And in the karmic origins of Mount Shigi, the Shigisaengi, they intervene at crucial moments and places to move us backwards and forwards in time, including in a dream sequence at the heart of the story. Over centuries, these atmospheric phenomena would become standardized in much of Japanese picture making, with modifications emerging through the complex choreography of confrontations and embraces of pictures from China. Clouds and mist would become conventional. Before I move into the heart of my presentation, clouds and the art of the ultimate conventionalizer, Kano Motonobu, a word on these motifs in Chinese painting is warranted. When I started working on this topic, soon enough, I found that an initial bold assertion that Chinese paintings mostly have clear skies, that was not entirely correct. For not only do cloudy mountains constitute a significant corpus of Chinese landscapes, such as this example attributed to Miyoran of the Song Dynasty, but clouds herald and frame auspicious appearances in Buddhist and Taoist paintings and in landscapes, where they are not actually painted with pigments or outlines, they perform a crucial role. Take the big three Northern Song Dynasty landscapes by Fan Quan, Guoxi, and Li Tang, for example, And we see, conveniently enough, a progression from the suggestion of mist at the base of Fan Quan's majestic peak at left, on a silk support of which nearly every inch is stained with ink, to Guo Xi's dexterous evocation of positive and negative to create passages of ascending mists, to, at right, Li Tong's explicit cloud-shaped passages of silk left unpainted, left in reserve. It might be, at least in Song Dynasty landscape paintings, that clouds and mist are most convincingly represented by not being painted, a contrast with what we have seen so far in Japan, where it's often applied in gold. I think that the dry airlessness of Nizan comes from his total evacuation of anything evoking atmosphere. There's no humidity in his landscape. A quality that, when taken up by his admirer Dong Qichang in the late Ming Dynasty, underscores the artlessness that he strove to embody. We could imagine that the faint red stripes of mist in this landscape by Ma Lin of the Southern Song were the very thing that Dong Qichang denigrated, their emotive poeticism easily slipping into a kind of vacuous insipidity. Fortunately for clouds, Japanese painting would remain free of Dong Qichang's imposing standards. Now we finally turn to my subject, Kano Motonobu and his approaches to clouds. A prolific painter, protean painter, who led a large studio of assistants with whose help much of Japanese painting would be set on a stable stylistic course for the succeeding 2 centuries, Kano Motonobu would become a hallowed figure in the decades after his death. If he never quite achieved the saintly status of Sesshu, whom he probably never met, he nevertheless occupied a central position in the first treatise on Japanese painting, Honcho Gashi, and his works and countless imitations were must-haves in the collections of the shoguns and daimyo who ruled Japan until the late 19th century. No painter other than Sesshu occupied or comes close to Motonobu's early modern reputation. The history Honcho Gashi lauds Motonobu as a synthesizer, the painter who decisively wedded the polychrome native Yamato-e mode of painting to the monochrome ink Chinese mode of Sesshu. Motonobu's best works demonstrate his unmatched capacity to internalize and re-envision what came before him, whether it was actual Chinese paintings in the shogun's personal collection or colorful narrative scrolls by his purported in-laws in the Tosa school. And we see examples of his many modes of paintings in this montage that I created. By the time Motonobu was active, the art of painting in Japan, by which we usually mean in Kyoto and Nara, was well equipped with an array of methods for portraying the various effects and purposes of masses of suspended water droplets. Put broadly, they can be divided between 3 main approaches or types. First, as we see here, clouds and mist made from a combination of applied metals, such as silver, or minerals like mica, and sometimes paint. A group of screen paintings, like these, rare survivals from the 15th century, illuminates how complex the materials and uses of these motifs could be. The first painting, above, shows bands of mist in silver, gold, mica, and indigo drifting across the upper portion of the composition, perhaps evoking how we sometimes ourselves experience suspended water vapor in low fog or rising mist. In another, it becomes more cloud-like or shaped, bordered with cooler applications of silver and mica. And in this one, it is applied exclusively in gold, in shapes that echo ambiguously what we see in the sandbars below. It's not clear where the clouds end and sandbars begin in this work, I think. Now, the second type consists of light blue mist, sometimes accented with gold, painted in horizontal bands, as in these examples, mainly in narrative hand scrolls. In some examples, beginning with the early 14th century miracles of the Kasuga deities above, We can see how bands of blue mist are used to frame a scene, to frame and divide, providing spatial and temporal transition, to divide within a single scene, to jump rapidly across multiple spaces, as we see here. Now, the third type are clouds and mist conjured from diluted ink and water, primarily on landscapes mounted as hanging scrolls, folding screens, and other formats. This approach comes from Chinese and Korean painting in graded monochrome ink wash. In many cases, painters opted to add touches of gold to accentuate their mist and add another element of shimmering light to their surfaces. That gold, silver, and mica clouds so frequently appear on large surface paintings such as folding screens above and folding fans, while bands of light blue mist appear to have originated in horizontally oriented hand scrolls below, indicates that the different types were assumed to possess a degree of format specificity, with some exceptions, of course. I think this is important because I know of no hand scrolls with gold clouds before Motonobu, because the strong associations between format and vapor representation underscore their specific pictorial functions, which will be the main point I hope to make about Motonobu's particular approach. It's also worth mentioning that the Japanese language, including the language spoken in Motonobu's day, has had a particularly rich descriptive vocabulary for clouds and mist, of which many are confirmed in the Japanese-Portuguese dictionary published in Nagasaki in 1603. We find, for example, murakumo, a term for scattered clouds that cover the moon, yakumotatsu, and yairokumo, meaning stacked clouds and multicolored clouds, yugumo, for evening clouds, and others, though the question of how painting effects reflect such words for atmospheric phenomena must await another occasion. The first works by Motonobu that I'd like to consider today are a set of four hanging scrolls, ink on paper, on the subject of the 8 views of Xiao and Xiang, a poetic topic from Song Dynasty China that had become a common subject for paintings in monochrome ink, especially in Japan and in Korea. Each of the celebrated views bears a title, such as Evening Bell from a Misted Temple, that supplied painters with a starting point from which to evoke the varied atmospheric conditions, times of day, or seasons in ink and water. Motonobu scrolls combine 2 views in each, so there are 4 scrolls, 2 views each. And in the picture showing the evening bell and geese descending on a sandbar, which is the second from left, he conjures the eponymous mist with a technique that we already saw in Northern Song landscape painting, leaving passages of the paper, see if I can point it out, here, there mainly, leaving passages of the paper support unpainted and surrounding them with trees and mountains painted in varying shades of ink wash. Defining the shapes of these rising mists with diluted ink, particles of ink suspended in water, Motonobu approximates the actual process that forms mist itself, tiny droplets of water suspended in air. So ink suspended in water, water suspended in air. There's a kind of alchemical connection, I think. Even if he didn't possess a scientific understanding of water vapor, I think he was conscious of the potential for painting to mimic natural phenomena. Look, for example, at the hanging scroll combining river and sky and evening snow with night rain of Xiao and Xiang on the right. An unlikely but not incongruous union of a winter and summer scene in the same picture. Do you see? We have winter in the front with snow and summer with the strong rain in the background, but it's all happening at once. We readily perceive the diagonal bands of unpainted paper as wind-driven rain, and may be surprised to find that Motonobu's source for the required technique is a painting by the Southern Song painter Muchi of Fishing Village in Evening Glow, a painting in the Shogun's collection, in which the same diagonal bands of diluted ink or unpainted paper are rays of light from the setting sun refracted through mist. Motonobu must have understood the temporal sleight of hand he was pulling off, as numerous Chinese paintings include this near contemporary scroll by a Ming painter named Lu Wenying, depict driving rain in the same way that he does. Now, Motonobu didn't always adhere closely to such received methods. In some cases, notably the Zen patriarch's panels from the temple Daisen-in, he paints clouds with clear contour lines, brushed in gray. Can you see the sort of bubbly outlines of the clouds? I'll show a close-up too. This has often struck me as a strange choice because outlines can flatten pictorial motifs into patterns. But it could be that he wanted to maintain some consistency between the crisp and hard edges of the figures, the rocks, and the trees that bring clarity and underscore the panel's expository mood. The Daisen-in panels were removed from the temple and remounted as hanging scrolls a long time ago, but when they are restored, as can be done digitally, to their architectural context, the meeting of the panels at right angles enhances the pictorial depth that Motonobu must have been striving to convey. Not only does the receding space appear more at the corner, appear more plausible, but protruding forms, especially rocks tellingly placed at the corners, and the billowing mist that seems to float out of the corner, also begin to break free from the picture plane. I know of no other painter from the period who attempts this with clouds, and thus wonder where Motonobu got the idea. An immediate possibility comes from the Ami, so-called Ami painters, a three-generation lineage that also served as curators of the shogun's art collection. Motonobu apparently collaborated with one of them, Soami, at the same building in the temple Daisen-in, where he painted the Zen patriarchs, just in the next room. As a member of the shogun's coterie, Soami was a painter of higher rank and prestige than Motonobu and was responsible for paintings such as these panels depicting the 8 views of Xiaoanxiang, again, in the central chamber. But he also produced standalone works, such as this landscape painting in San Francisco, and another in which he renders clouds with outlines in light gray, doubled either with a split brush or a double brush. It's likely that Motonobu adapted this method for the more expansive format of his sliding panels. So you can see the same kind of a scalloped edge in this picture. The pair of screens, Birds and Flowers of the Four Seasons, produced by Motonobu in 1549, could not seem more different from what we've been looking at, so much so that it's hard to imagine that this was painted by the same artist. Sealed and signed with his age given as 74, Birds and Flowers represent the side of Motonobu's artistry, with the help of his studio, of course, that received praise in the history I mentioned earlier, displaying a fusion of colorful birds and decorative gold with structural and spatial rigor. The screens are sheathed with gold, which is applied both to the surfaces of the clouds with their telltale scalloped edges and shapes, and to much of the ground and even the air beyond, giving the screens a warm brilliance and silhouetting the painted birds and flora. The screens' interlacing of clouds and avian and floral motifs together with their grounds of gold foil calls to our attention the methods required to make them. A mind-bendingly complex process that began with a full-scale cartoon to be transferred to the final paper support on which all of the motifs, clouds to birds to flowers, were roughly sketched and subsequently painted and then gilded over. So the outlines are done first, then the gold is applied, and then the birds are applied to the areas, and the trees to the areas that did not receive gilding. In this process, again, gold was applied first, but only to the portions that wouldn't be painted, leaving ungilded holes of raw paper support to which mineral pigments could be applied with reliable adherence. Paint doesn't really stick to gold very well. But this is not to say that no painting was applied over the gold. It clearly was, but only the most delicate of details, such as petals, twigs, or blades of grass. Process within our grasp, let's turn to the clouds' strangeness. For while they float above in the upper part of the picture, which is what clouds normally do, establishing a border between the painting and its frame, they do the same at the base. You see their clouds on the bottom too, which I think is remarkable. And they waft laterally, not in a single broad mass of fog, but in decorously discrete mini clouds that pass before and behind the screen's feathered protagonists. Why did Motonobu do it this way, and where does this come from? And where would it go? The second, this is just a picture, a photograph of it folded, just to give you an idea of the three-dimensional space. The second question, where this would go, offers a good way to apprehend the complexity of the screen surface when we compare the pair to another produced around the same time by Kano Motonobu's son, Kano Shoei. You see how things are simpler in the son's tableau. The clouds frame above and below, but largely leave the middle alone, where indeed a flat surface of gold leaf takes care of the problem of transition from foreground to background. There's really no background in this picture. Shoei takes a step away from his father's approach in adding patterned low relief surfaces like these in shell paste, a kind of gesso-like material that would be gilded to his clouds, turning the clouds, remember clouds are not solid, turning non-solid clouds into solid forms that possess a modeled and thus haptic quality that drifts away from their original vaporous nature. Motonobu's clouds are also gilded over applications of shell paste at their edges, but perform an altogether different role, which is as a system of spatial calibration. The clouds let us, let me see, is this right? Oops. I think this might be the wrong version of some of the slides are missing. So may we pause for a moment and put the right file in? I'll go once again. This is Kano Shoei's screen painting, and as I'm showing you, he goes a step further from his father's approach with a simpler system of clouds. And in addition to, although there are not as many surfaces compared to this, he makes a modification, which is to include these clouds with patterns on them. And what I was trying to point out before I stopped myself was that there's a transformation of vapor to something that suggests touchability, a kind of haptic quality, as we would say. So, and then even Motonobu makes a slight edge to his clouds, slightly raised. So Motonobu's clouds are also gilded over applications of shell paste at their edges, but perform an altogether different role, which is as a system of spatial calibration, as I'll demonstrate. The clouds let us count. The clouds allow us to count the number of planes he maps out, and I come up with about 10 different layers from the lower border to the upper border. If you just think about what's in front, what's behind, what's in front, what's behind, you end up with something like 10 different layers. This is accomplished by layering and overlaying and interweaving so that we are consistently aware of the front and behind position of every motif. I think it's remarkable that Motonobu achieves this mainly with gold leaf, a material whose opacity and reflectivity create flatness, the opposite of depth. Masaccio, this is not, but it presents a plausible pathway to the challenge of achieving pictorial depth. The last example of Motonobu's approach to clouds that I will discuss this afternoon, a bit longer than the others, is his set of 5 hand scrolls, the legends of the Shakyamuni Temple, or Shakado Engi, which depicts the origin story of the wooden statue of Shaka, the historical Buddha, which entered the temple Seiryoji in Kyoto in the late 10th century. Seiryoji's Shaka image was the most intensely venerated image, or one of the most intensely venerated images in medieval Japan, rivaled in importance perhaps only by the image of the Bodhisattva Kannon in Kiyomizu-dera. This Seiryoji Shaka was believed at the time to be the very image that the ancient Indian king Udayana had carved when the actual Buddha Shakyamuni had traveled to heaven to visit his deceased mother, as we see in a detail from Motonobu's scrolls showing King Udayana overseeing the creation of this statue. As an actual likeness of the living Buddha, King Udayana's image was considered not a statue, but a living image endowed with its own agency and power. How it got to Japan is a long story, but to put it briefly, the image was believed to have found its way to China, where it was seen by a Japanese monk named Chonen during his travels there in the 980s. According to the text upon which Motonobu's scrolls are based, Chonen had a copy made of the original image, but the copy and the original image miraculously switched places at night, so that it was time to return to Japan. Chonen didn't take the copy, but he took the original Indian icon with him. And so here he is praying to the copy, and then on the left we see the images are trading places. So this image was thought to be from India. But in the 1950s, it was discovered that it was made in China. As we can see, this complicated story evidently demanded a complex pictorial strategy. Clouds and mist play a significant role, and in the legends of the Shakyamuni Temple, and the legends of the Shakyamuni Temple perhaps show Motonobu's manipulation of these motifs at their very most sophisticated. The first scene visually announces that what we will witness in the preceding scrolls. It shows a Buddha of the distant past, seated in his lavish heavenly abode, venerated by an assembly of bodhisattvas and other heavenly beings. Aside from the exotic architecture with colored and gilded tiles, it is the clouds that create a sense of visual drama. Tinged in ochre, pink, and blue, their layered, billowing forms part to reveal a celestial vision that predicts that magical things are going to happen. They establish a visual vocabulary that the painter will return to repeatedly in the pictures that will unroll before us. The scrolls begin with the story of the life of the Buddha, and we fast forward here to the most consequential moments of his youth, when, as Prince Siddhartha, he leaves his palace and has 4 encounters. First, at far right with an old man. Second, at left with a sick man. Then with a corpse. You can see the corpse in the foreground. And finally, with a peaceful ascetic, a kind of wise man. These chance encounters will be the catalyst for Siddhartha's quest to comprehend the nature of human existence and its foundation in suffering. Look at how Motonobu frames these short episodes, situating them alternatively at the lower and upper edges of the scroll and dividing them with bands of blue mist. The rapidity with which he paces the scenes becomes clearer when we look at the series of them completely rolled out. Siddhartha decides to abandon his royal comforts and embarks on the great departure. Spirited out of the palace on his horse, which is borne aloft by celestial attendants. Here, too, Motonobu introduces a billowy white cloud with a trail like that of a thinking or speaking bubble familiar to us in modern cartoons or manga. It serves as the vehicle by which Siddhartha, on his way to becoming a perfected being himself, would leave the mundane world. So you see there are different kinds of clouds that Motonobu is using. In the final few scenes at the end of the second scroll, we behold him achieving Buddhahood, a physical transformation that Motonobu tracks in how his body and his robe turn to gold, and his platform transforms from a green earthen form to a hexagonal throne. In the scene at right, he preaches to the various classes of beings beneath a sala tree, while self-playing musical instruments float above. In the scene at the left, he appears before a court of bodhisattvas and devas and disciples. Equally crucial to these scenes are the clouds, Framed as now expected with bands of blue mist, the figures are also surrounded by swirling clouds in light pink and light gold, while wispy cirrus clouds above stretch and curl to emphasize the auspicious happenings that we are witnessing. In later scenes, Motonobu's cloud devices reappear. Above, when King Udayana's image descends from heaven to earth, it is framed with billowing, auspicious clouds, and when the statue the Japanese monk Chonen has requested switches places with the Udayana image, the blue mist again opens to a series of short visual episodes. As symbolic motifs and tools for narrative pacing, the clouds and mist betray also Motonobu, the painter's, understanding of the story at hand. His role can be imagined as something akin to that of a modern film director, determining everything from lighting effects to the speed with which the story is told. The gold clouds and gray and blue mists that are so often in the background of Japanese pictures, ever present but seldom given much voice beyond brief commentary, ask us to look more closely. Especially as we have seen in Motonobu's work, they can perform a host of functions to articulate space and time. Beyond their basic visual role of adding color, light, and yes, also decorative pattern. I have yet to find anything like a theoretical treatise that explains clouds, but their deep history and diversity, when examined closely, may offer the means by which we might discover overarching ideas about them. Is it simply that Japan is often a humid, cloudy place? It could be, or it could be something more. So thank you very much. Very happy to have questions, yeah.
We can have a session of questions and answer. Who will break the ice?
Matthew, thank you very much for your conference. I have a question, although I don't know if there's like a definite answer. Looking at the patterns, I was wondering if there's like a reason why they would choose a certain pattern over another in each work of art. I don't know if each pattern has like a symbolical meaning to it. So yeah, that would be it.
Thank you. By patterns, are you referring to the patterns on these clouds here?
Yeah, the ones that have like, the ones in those images.
With the raised surface, okay. Actually, there was an article that appeared just last year by a professor named Midori Sano Midori, about patterns on gold clouds. And she came up with a basically typology or chronology of these clouds. And it appears that they begin in the late 16th century. The earliest datable example we have is this one, the pair of, the screens by Kano Motonobu, which actually is datable because there's a diary reference to this painting, which is quite rare. So we know it was produced around 1574. So this would be our earliest example. And as you can see, the patterns are irregular. They seem something like clouds or water or something, too. And then we have many other examples like these. And the ones up above, here, for example, this is from a pair of screens showing people dressed the way people in Japan dressed around 1620. So maybe it's from the second quarter of the 17th century. And then these others here have little dots around the edge or other patterns inside, sometimes regular, sometimes irregular, sometimes kind of somewhat irregular. But we don't really know. In this case, where we have this type of pattern, which is called a triple tortoiseshell pattern, or triple tortoiseshell chrysanthemum, Mitsukikkomon here, we know that was used as a family crest by one family called the Asai family. And the Asai were related to Oda Nobunaga and Toyotomi Hideyoshi by marriage, I think. So it could be something like a family crest related to the patron, maybe. The other ones, such as the one here, this is called a shippo tsunagimon, or a cloisonné pattern, which it looks like a kind of crossing, but actually they're circles that are intersecting. And the intersecting circles make new patterns. And this is a pattern we know from textiles, but we don't know if it has any particular meaning in this work. It seems to have been a practice that becomes very refined and regularized by around the middle of the 17th century, but then it sort of drops off and is disused after that. It's too much work, too much resources. Earlier screens like this one don't have any gold leaf. It's just gold paint that's applied very thickly. And then that seems to, these are both by the same painter, these two. And sometimes then the painters will choose to use gold leaf instead, or a combination of gold leaf and gold. So the short answer, as opposed to my long answer, is we don't know. Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much.
Sure.
Another question? Yes.
Hi, well, I also study here, but I study on the Chinese culture. So I'm very ignorant of Japanese painting, but I wanted to ask if, for example, in some paintings that you've shown and other ones that I've seen, there's also lots of clouds, and you mentioned that clouds also have a Buddhist background when it comes to the idea of the Sukhavati or the Pure Land. So I wanted to ask you if this has something to do with sort of, I don't know how to say it in English, but it's like a political background also, trying to justify or to in some way uphold power with the Buddhist idea of that the place where there's government is also sort of a pure land, because it also has to do, for example, in the Sukhavati Sutra, with the idea of governance of lands, which are pure lands, etc. So I don't know if it also has to do with the idea of governance and Buddhist governance.
I think that's a really wonderful question and a fascinating interpretation. In fact, there is a very long article by a late, well, she died, I think, in 1989, so it's a while ago, American professor named Carolyn Wheelwright, which she co-published with a German scholar named Bettina Klein in the journal Artibus Asiae on this very kind of painting, a screen painting, in a Sukhavati Sutra Pure Land interpretation. And the way they talk about these screens is to discuss them as visualizations of Pure Land Buddhist gardens, the type of space that is described before the palace of Amida. And so they support that interpretation, which I think is partly correct, certainly. They support that interpretation through the general references to gold that pervade the Pure Land Sutras, the Amida Sutra as well. But where they fall short, in my point of view, is that the kinds of flowers and birds that are depicted here are actually real flowers and birds from this world, as opposed to the types that are described in the sutras. So the other grounding they have in their interpretation is that we know from documentary evidence that this kind of screen painting was used in funerals too, in funeral rituals. And we cannot argue with that. That's true. We know that from diaries, from actual historical records. But I don't think this is the only purpose of a folding screen. It could be used for multiple kinds of occasions. And the aspect of your own question, which is the suggestion of a political element to this, in which, if I understand what you were saying correctly, a reference to a Pure Land paradise can also be a reference to a sacred realm here and now, would certainly make these very attractive as, I mean, they're deluxe works of art, right? These are incredibly expensive and incredibly important in art making at the time. That would certainly lend them to the kind of levels of patronage that we think we can associate with these. I talked about the clouds today, but I didn't talk about the way these paintings were used. And we have very specific references to 3 pairs of folding screens, kin byobu, so literally gold screens, painted by Kano Motonobu and his assistants, I guess, for export to China, to the court of Emperor Jiajing in the 16th century. Japan had something like, I think, 18 diplomatic missions in the Muromachi period to China, official ones. And at the end, the shogun was too poor. Maybe he wasn't sending them anymore, but maybe he sent a boat, but then the Ouchi daimyo nobles sent their own. And in each of these missions, as the art historian Sakakibara Satoru has shown through records, there was a pattern of sending gilded screens, as well as fans. So screens, you'd get 3. I think the Chinese patrons, they stipulated, we want 3 gold screens each time, and 100 fan paintings, and no figure paintings in the fan, only birds and flowers. And so the other aspect to this kind of painting is, although this one luckily never went to China, it probably looks very much like those screen paintings that were sent to China by the most elite patrons in Japan at the time. And there's a second part to this. So if they may not be a political statement, but they're certainly a diplomatic statement. And I like to pause for a moment just to think about, of all the painters who could produce something like this, it's Kano Motonobu who's chosen to do this. It's his paintings, screens and fans that are sent in these large numbers to the court of the Emperor of China. Not only did these screens, or ones like these, go to China, but at least one pair went to Europe. And it's a painting by Kano Motonobu's grandson, Kano Eitoku, depicting Azuchi Castle and the town next to Azuchi, probably like the cityscapes that I was showing at the beginning. And they were sent to, we don't know where they are now. They're maybe in Italy, we don't know. But they were received by Gregory the 13th. We know that there's a Jesuit, not Jesuit, but there's a Vatican account of this. And I think the fact that the Biombo del Marqués cadereta exists, and with the gold clouds, and is a cityscape, and the Biombo del Palacio, sorry for my pronunciation, de los Virreyes de Mexico, also exists with gold clouds. It seems to indicate that something like this was coming through, or someone saw. But is it enough for, my question is it enough for a Spanish missionary, or maybe Mexican missionary, to go to Japan to see this, maybe, something like this, and then just remember it, and then have something like this produced? Or is this produced based on something that's here? That's the eternal question. And returning to the question about the patterns on the surfaces of the gold, when I was beginning to work on this, I mean, I've really tried to keep this byombos at arm's length, because I'm not a scholar of the art of Mexico or Western art. I mean, I don't have so much to say about these, but it's really interesting. The shapes of the clouds not only are similar, but also the raised patterns are also really suggestively close. So there's a lot going on between the two. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but I hope it maybe answers some others. Yeah. Okay.
Muchas gracias, profesor. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your time in giving us all these talks. It's been fascinating, and I have so many questions. It's actually quite infuriating, but I'm going to try to narrow it down to just two, and a third one, which is quite simple. But firstly, I was wondering about something quite similar than what my fellow student just asked, about the relationship between Buddhist thought and the cloud patterns. And I was remembering a certain interaction I had with the Caracho printing. I forgot the word for taller in English. I completely forgot about it. Workshop, perhaps? Workshop, thank you. And workshop in Kyoto. They produce a quite famous cloud pattern, and they good God, I'm forgetting all my English. This is quite infuriating. They relate it quite a lot to Zen aesthetics and the idea of absence and the cloud covering a bit of the image to this idea of the beauty of the incomplete. And I was wondering if perhaps there is a similar link. My second question, just to very briefly summarize it, is in your personal opinion, was the choice of reproducing the gold clouds in the New Spain versions of the biobus that you just showed, which I find absolutely fascinating, would it be just an aesthetic choice, or would it be also perhaps symbolic? And lastly, and most importantly, what is the name of your book and how may we find it? And that is all. Thank you very much.
I haven't written a book about clouds, but I have a chapter that touches on them. But the way you get the book is I send it to you. So I'll send a copy. I have 4 left, so I can let go of one. For it just has to have a good home where it could be used. I think maybe. By the way, what's the AI company? Probably scanned it. If you have a good friend who knows Chinese, there is this vast library, but it's always changing websites because they're illegal. Anyway, I don't have it myself. But back to your very interesting question, I can't really speak to the question about or comment so much on the significance of the clouds in these paintings made in New Spain. I think they I think the ones in the Rivero Lake collection are closer to what we may expect in Japan because they are at the top and in the middle and the bottom. So there is some awareness in what I think is a discontiguous composition that clouds can effectively function or float in different parts. But as you see in this example and also in the other, the clouds are on the surface. They're not, there's no depth indication in them. Whether that's something that these painters didn't understand or whether it was something that they didn't think was useful or important in the painting tradition that is at least in some ways based on linear perspective, that maybe it's not necessary. The history of byombos is a really interesting one, though, because it's a format that, if not initially inspired by paintings from East Asia, particularly from Japan, it's certainly a format for painting that is revivified or given new energy through this encounter. And I think it's interesting that it's happening here, right? Because this is as a place that is a crossroads, really, between Asia and Europe at the time. It's particularly receptive, perhaps, to new visual forms and the demands of outfitting this growing new city, or not new city, but another expansion of an original city, for example. So, but yeah, I wish that they would be discovered here in Mexico or Portugal or Spain or Italy or someplace. A Japanese screen that we know has been there so long. I think in Portugal there's one, but it's only known from the backing papers. The image is lost, but the documents that were used as the papers behind the main surface, they were published, right? And so there was something, but we just don't know what it depicted. Yeah. Thank you.
It's not a question, it's just a commentary regarding what you were talking right now. March of last year, it was published, the first book by the Mexican researcher, Sonia Ocaña. The book was published by the University of Zaragoza, and it's called La Domesticación de Asia, so the taming of Asia. It's 100% devoted to the market of mostly Japanese objects into New Mexico during the 17th century. And she has a whole chapter dedicated to the Biobús market in what at that time was New Spain. Although there are no remaining Biobús or Japanese Biobús, there are a lot of documents. So she works mostly with documents, with descriptions. So one of the things she does is try to reconstruct which kind of Japanese Biobús were imported to New Spain and how probably 80% of them, or most of them, remained here. So there were just a few that continued their journey to Spain because the main market for Japanese objects, not only Biobús, but was here in Mexico in general, not only Mexico City. So it will be also an interesting reading for you.
Shall I say, me encanta leer? Maybe I take my iPad and hold it over the pages, and yeah, but this is fascinating, and I think it's having a study like this is a wonderful opportunity for a new generation of students too, who are interested in border crossing themes. Maybe there are questions that are posed by this book that can be partially answered from knowledge of Japanese art, right? So thank you.
Well, hi, thank you very much for your talk. I was really fascinated by the use of eggshells in the panels because in Western art, the canonization of collage happened until the 20th century with George Braque and Picasso, but here is way older. I think this is important to talk about this because it's a good opportunity to reflect about this narrative of Western art and the achievement of Western art and the hegemony of Western art over East, over Japan. No? And so I think this is like something very important to take into account, maybe. I don't know if you have written about this. I know you said that you are not like a specialist in Western art, but I don't know, I think it's very curious that collage was used in Japanese art like very centuries ago.
I think that's thank you for a great comment and question, and for reminding us of the vocabulary that is also used to discuss works like these. I will press pause a little bit because if this is what you're referring to, this kind of pattern that they're referring to, or the eggshells, I don't know that I was referring to eggshells, but the surface patterns that we see in the gold here is made of, I said shell paste. It's shells from seashells. So it's calcium carbonate, I think in the chemical compound. So it's like gesso. It's made of ground up white of shells and then made into a paste and applied to the surface and built up. And it looks like it's embossed, but it's sculpted. It's not embossed. But the effect is certainly collage-like. Absolutely. I agree with that. And we certainly see in the Kongoji sun and moon screen detail that I didn't even discuss. This was the subject of a dissertation by a friend of mine. But the active surfaces of bits of silver and gold here and the raising of these wave surfaces are actually built up as well. That adds to a dynamic support surface relationship, absolutely anticipates what we see happening in the early 20th century in, I guess, France and Spain initially. Now, I have never considered Western art to have been hegemonic, or to have had a hegemonic position vis-a-vis Japanese or East Asian art. But we have colleagues in the US who are interested in this very topic, and there is a book by a younger colleague of ours named Christopher Kersey from the University of California, Los Angeles, which deals with these very questions that you're posing. He and I speak a different language. We come from very different points of view, and his question, I think, the main question is, why is it that in cases like collage or abstraction, has it taken so long it's still taking some time for the field of art history more narrowly and intellectual world more broadly. Has it taken so long for there to be recognition of the remarkably early cases? This sort of blob like cloud on the left, or right, is from the early 17th century. And I don't know, it used to bother me when people would say, oh, it looks so modern. I didn't know how to respond to that. I think this is something that Professor Kersey is interested in and responding to. So he would be a great person to have come talk here, actually. It's, to me, that question is not really one that I find myself very troubled by, because if you're a Western art historian and you don't know this, that's your problem. Come to my class, learn about Japanese art and discover. If I have any disagreement with my colleague's approach, it's that he is, in a sense, foregrounding this hegemonic relationship. But if you operate within circles of Japanese art historians, speaking with them in their language about their traditions and their art, it doesn't really become much of an issue. But maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. Wonderful, provocative question, though.
Actually, he is on our list for a future visiting professor. The book, the title of the book is Faith in Images, the Idea of Modernity in Japanese Medieval Art. And we will have it. We have it here.
First of all, thank you very much for your talk today. And my question goes more related to the biobus. Maybe it's slightly technical, but how is it decided how many panels should the biobus should have? Is it depending on the space is going to be shown, or depending on the person that commissioned it, or both?
Another excellent question, for which I thank you, and a question that, like clouds, is one that is not really asked very much, and something I keep coming back to this. How many panels does this have? 2, 4, 6, 8. 8 panels, as opposed to 6, right? Absolutely important to think about. As far as the way that I would try to answer that question would be to look at the pictorial evidence in earlier works of art, in particular narrative hand scrolls like the ones from which I was just showing you some scenes. Let me go down here, pull one up. This, for example, okay? So here, you might notice that at the lower corner here, there is a picture within the picture, a folding screen, actually in a room that has the great purple lady herself, Murasaki Shikibu, looking out at the moon over Lake Biwa as she's inspired to write the last 4 chapters of the Tale, 4 chapters of the Tale of Genji, 10 maybe. And what we find in works like this, which date to about 2 centuries earlier than most of our extant early folding screens, they consistently show that screen paintings are in 6 panels. And the very oldest examples of folding screens that survive, I guess I took it out, but ones like this group here, for example, these are also on 6 panels. And so there is a correspondence between the representation of a folding screen in a picture and the surviving examples that confirms that 6 panels was the most common. Why that is, I don't know. There are a number of ways we could approach that, though. There are 12 months of the year. There are 4 seasons. 12 is an easily divisible number for both of those, for 12 and for 4, or for 2, for that matter. Beyond that, it's difficult to come up with any clear rationale. The area that I think is waiting to be explored, there needs to be a part 2 to the famous book by the Chinese art historian Wu Hong. He's a professor at the University of Chicago, and he wrote a book called The Double Screen. And it's a book about a lot of things. It was more popular amongst historians of Japanese art than Chinese art somehow, but it's a book about screen paintings in China, and almost none survive. But we know they existed because we see so many pictures of them. And his study, I think, it looks at examples up through the Song Yuan dynasty maybe, but there are so many books coming out from Chinese museums, Chinese collections. So it's an opportunity for someone willing to do it to go through and look at as many different examples of paintings within paintings like this as they could find. And what's the standard in China? Are there 6, 8, 4, and Korea too? It seems Korea could be pairs of 8. Then in Japan, by the early, 4 is rare. 4 rhymes with death, shi, right? So I don't know how old this taboo is, but 2 panels becomes more popular in the Edo period. But those are it's an impossible question to answer, but these are the ways I would try to answer it.
Anybody else? No? Well, Dr. McKelway, thank you very much for coming to Mexico, for having the time of going to Carlos Museum with our students, for the exchange you had today with them, and also for this talk. And as you said, well, let's think that this is the first visit from you of many. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure, and I can't wait to reciprocate. So thank you.